very much. First of all, I want to thank everyone who made it possible for me to be here this morning. And it really is a distinct pleasure to be on the podium with the individuals who are here. And I particularly want to acknowledge my fellow warrior, Joe Klein. And Joe and I go back, and I just appreciate the battles that he fought in New York and what he's meant to the movement elsewhere. I'm trying to get to know Secretary Bennett, and I know that he's a fighter as well. And so I just want to thank all of you for allowing me to be here. And I also want to acknowledge my Bayo family, Black Alliance for Educational Options. I see when the opportunity to go get coffee, my president left. So, you know, I was going to introduce the dude, but he's like, you know, he's going to get coffee. So, hey, what can I say? You know what I'm saying? And a whole lot of people went to get coffee. And I do want to recognize Cherie Medlock, who's the National Advocacy Director and has been instrumental in things that have happened here in Louisiana. And Eric Lewis, who's the current state director, and Carla and Tracy from Ohio. Buck, I know he went to get coffee, but he at least came back. So I appreciate that. I stand before you today driven by a fundamental belief that burns in the very core of my heart and my soul. I believe that our children are our most precious gift from God, and that it is our responsibility, with God's guidance to love them, to nurture them, to care for them, and to make sure that every single one of them is educated. But there's another image that sticks with me every single day. On Tuesday of last week, I was speaking in Greensboro, and I was speaking at the International Civil Rights Museum. And the interesting thing about the International Civil Rights Museum is that it used to be the Woolworths in downtown Greensboro. And so I have this image that on February 1st, 1960, 4 black students from North Carolina A&T sat down at a lunch counter and demanded to be served. And in 2012, 4 black students will sit down at a lunch counter where they are welcome and can't read the menu. And I asked myself, how did America allow this to happen? And most particularly, I asked myself, how did black people in America allow this to happen? So this summit is billed as Leadership for Change. And within that context, I'm supposed to address the topic of leadership in educational excellence and why it matters. We hear a lot these days about change, and I'm all for change, but I want to know what kind of change. I want to know whose interests are going to be served by the change. And over the years, I've become very cynical about all these calls for change, because I've concluded that most people in America want change as long as nothing changes. And so I believe that poor children in this country, particularly poor children of color, are caught in the talk but no action concept of change. For example, many of our leaders say they want to change the educational reality for these children in one breath, and then in the next breath, they want the unions and all the other protectors of the status quo to remain in power. In far too many places, the people who are now in charge of leading us on the race to the top are the same people who led us on the race to the bottom. There will never, 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 never be any real change in education in Louisiana and the rest of America for our poorest children without changing the power relationships within systems of education that are the barriers to any significant, sustained change that will benefit our children the most. So indeed, if there's going to be educational excellence for our poorest children, a disproportionate number of whom are children of color, we need leaders who are not bought off, timid, and risk adverse. We need people who are willing to stand up, even if it means you lose your next election or you go down in the polls. We need leaders. We need leaders who in the hip-hop vernacular are not scared. We need the type of leadership that is exemplified by your understanding of the Stockdale Paradox. And those of you who read Good to Great by Collins heard about the Stockdale Paradox. Stockdale was this dude who ran for vice president under Perot, and he was a prisoner of war. And they asked him, how was it that you were able to survive when so many of your comrades could not? And he said, I survived because I faced the brutal truth about my reality with an undying belief that I could overcome. And we're never going to get anywhere in America unless we face the brutal truth about where we are when it comes to educating children in our community. And there's all kinds of data I could use. The governor talked about the OECD data. There's all kinds of things, but I picked one piece of data that I want to share. And it's the NAEP reading scores for 4th grade in America. White students, 27% below basic, 77% at or above basic, 42% proficient, 10% advanced. For black students, 51% below basic, 49% at basic, 16% at or above proficiency, and only 2% advanced. I chose the 4th grade reading to make a point. If you are unable to read by 4th grade, or for that matter, 2nd grade or 3rd grade, your chances of completing high school drop considerably. If you do not complete high school in America, what chance in the world do you have to make it in America? Zero chance. And I want you all to understand this, because when some of these politicians, not any of you who are here tonight, may I say, when some of these politicians are invited to the black community and they come in one of our churches, they all get up there and the first thing they say is, it takes a whole village to educate a child. First of all, most of them ain't never been to the village, couldn't find the village with MapQuest. Getting up talking about it takes the whole village. I'm tired of that village. So I read Tom Friedman's book, the first one, or not the first one, but The World is Flat, because the one I'm reading now about That Used to Be Us is scaring me more than The World is Flat. I thought I couldn't be scared anymore. But in his book, Friedman has another parable I want to leave with you. It says that in Africa, every day, a gazelle gets up. And the gazelle knows that if it can't run faster than the fastest lion, it's going to get killed. Every day, a gazelle gets up and knows that if it can't run faster than the slowest lion, it's going to starve. The lion understands if I can't catch this gazelle, I'm going to starve. Either way, when the sun comes up, they both start running. And what's happening is, all over this world, when the sun comes up, there are young people running. And these young people in the rest of the world are running faster than our best young people. And if they're running faster than our best young people, please tell me, what chance will a kid from New Orleans have who can't read, can't write, can't compute, can't analyze, can't think? No chance. And so when we're out here in all these meetings, and all these meetings are good, I mean, the beauty about all of these meetings is a lot of y'all come to the meeting and assume that because you came to the meeting that that was the change. And so I want to say very clearly, coming to these meetings and eating and drinking and pontificating don't mean zip if you leave and everything remains the same. We must clearly understand that unless there's a radical change, and we can't just fix the existing system, we need a radical transformation in our thinking and in our practice. Tinkering around at the edges, my friends, is not going to do it. And I want to be clear here. I am not saying that the traditional systems of education do not have some excellent educators who are doing heroic things every day for our kids. Because y'all know that and I know that. Some of you in this room are those people. But what I am saying is that many of these educators are in a system that is dysfunctional. And it's the system that prevents them from doing what they could do to realize their greatest aspirations for our children. So this is not a discussion about individual educators. Because when you start talking about this, people, oh, my mama was a teacher. My mama's sister was, and you talking about my mama. And in our community, we start talking about people's mama, that's a fighting thing. So I want to be clear, I ain't talking about y'all's mama. I'm talking about a system that does not work for you, and it didn't work for your mama necessarily. So that we must create innovative systems of learning opportunities based on creative and flexible governance and finance structures, structures that put the interests of students first, that allow dollars to follow students, and that holds adults accountable for student learning. Can you feel me? I had a teacher once tell me, Howard, I just did the best job I've ever done as a teacher. I felt good about what I did today, but the kids didn't get it. And I'm like, hello, hello, hello. There's actually a connection between you doing the greatest job that you have ever done and the kids getting it. And then we got to move away from a country where the only people who suffer from poor teaching are the kids. Because at a certain point in time, if we do not hold people accountable, I don't care if you're in a private school, charter school, traditional public school, at the end of the day, we must be held accountable for student achievement. Now, there are many issues that require bold and courageous leadership if we are to achieve educational excellence for our children. But there are, in my mind, no tougher issues than race and class. And so I want to warn y'all now that I ain't get the memo about being politically correct, okay? So, and I know, like, I've been invited to speak in Louisiana before, people get mad and stuff, and my whole thing is, hey, don't invite me back. You know, because I'm going to say what I got to say. Hey, so I'm getting ready to say some stuff now that Joe may have to help me get out of here. So we do ourselves, our children, our young people, a disservice if we don't confront the two elephants that are always sitting in the middle of a room like this one. Let's be clear. In Louisiana and in America, race matters and class matters. Race matters and class matters. For example, when you talk about money, I've heard people say, money don't matter. Hell, the only people say that got money. Don't nobody who's broke rolling around in America talk about how cool it is to be broke in America. Money matters, race matters. And we must face the cold-blooded fact that our children's lives are directly and inextricably impacted by the existence of differential power and access to resources based on their race and on their class. And there's a variety of different racial groups in America. But I'm going to talk about this from a black perspective because it's the one that I know best. The black community and segments of its leadership view education reform efforts through a prism of race and class. And therefore, there are some who oppose teacher quality provisions, charter schools, getting rid of teacher tenure, and of course, giving power to low-income and working-class people by giving them vouchers. They oppose these reforms, and many times they use race as the cover for the fact that they view parent choice and these other reforms as a threat to their class interests. Now, I was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, and I left Shreveport when I was 6 years old. But every summer, until I was 14, I came back to Shreveport to stay with my grandmother. So I'm in the generation that actually rode in the back of the bus. I actually drank from the colored water fountain. I actually went downtown and had to go through the side door and go up into the balcony to watch a movie downtown. I actually saw my mother kicked in the side by a white cop who didn't like the way she answered a question. My grandmother worked hard all day, came home, and these white men used to bring shirts over to our house. And I remember her staying up all times of night, washing these shirts in a wash tub. And she didn't have a washing machine. It was a scrub board. Some of them were starched, some of them were hanging on the lines, and she was ironed. So I understand that. And what you all have to understand is that there's a generation of us who will never forget this. There's a generation of us where the scars are still deep. So when white people come forward with plans that are supposed to help us, we're going to always be suspicious. Now, I know I ain't supposed to say that, but I'm telling y'all, the fact of the matter is that that's real. And all these black people in here who sit down quiet, they know what I'm telling you. And so I'm speaking for them, because they got to stay here. On the other hand, we must be absolutely clear that the black community, once you move past the fight against racism, we're not a homogeneous community. I'm always laugh when white people say, why don't you black people get together? Hell, why don't y'all get together? How is it that you think, just because we black, we just don't all get together? We have different interests. And what we need to be clear about is that school districts have been the entree to the middle class for so many black people. And so when you come up with something that radically changes that institution, it is resisted because for many people, their economic interests take front seat over the interests of our children. And so you shouldn't be surprised that people are like opposed. They're opposed because you're coming at their pensions, their mortgage payments, all those things that those jobs give them. You're coming at their economic interests. But people are not going to say that. So what they say is these white people again. And that resonates with a whole bunch of black people who are by definition suspicious of any white people. And y'all say, oh, this is 2012. It ain't like that no more. Come on now. This is still real in the depths of people's hearts and souls. And so what I'm saying to you is, when these things happen, a lot of people will say, particularly in the black community, they will say, who is really behind these proposals? What? And they don't never tell you, they just say, y'all really don't know the real plan. And so people like me, we get painted as being duped. Y'all being duped by these white people. And there's nothing worse than the black community than have somebody tell you, you duped by white people. You can be called a lot of things, but when they tell you duped by white people, that's like a problem. And so they say to you, don't you find it strange that these same people who support the death penalty, who are against the minimum wage, who don't want health care, on and on and on, these are the same people who are behind all of those proposals for change in the education system. Have I said anything controversial yet? So, because I'm not trying to be controversial. So, if we're going to have the type of leadership that leads us to education excellence, we got to have black leaders like Ann Duplessis. Black leaders who made a decision. And I remember the night Ann made the decision. Because if you know Ann, when she take off her shoes, that's an indicator that she listening now. See, because when she had her shoes on, she wasn't really listening to me. But when she took her shoes off, I knew we was like making progress. And so Ann said, I'm gonna stand up, because she realized that in her heart and her soul, that's what she had to do for our children. And she took flack from her colleagues. She took flack from her constituents. But Ann made a decision that she was going to stand for children. We need more people like her. We need people like my homeboy sitting right there from Shreveport, because he's taking the same type of flack for being willing to do the right thing for our children. We need white people who are willing to recognize that you cannot be against everything that helps poor families, but then you support vouchers and you think we're supposed to say cool. I mean, the reality of it is, when you're against every other thing, but you just for this, you've given our opponents a hammer to beat us over the head with, because it feeds into this whole duped argument. So, leadership for educational excellence will require us to walk a path that will lead to flack from both sides of the political spectrum. And unless we get that type of leadership, there is no long-term possibility of us creating the level of educational excellence we're going to need to make this a great country again. And my friends, please understand, what I'm talking about is not just an issue about these kids. It's an issue about our very democracy. You cannot have a democracy without an educated populace. And we cannot have thousands and thousands and thousands of our kids without an education and think that we can be a vibrant democracy. So at the end of the day, to paraphrase William Daggett, we must love our children's hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, their prayers more than we love the ideological, institutional, and economic interests of the current system. Thank you very much.